Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now, where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. The wind outside was cold that morning, biting against the windows like it wanted to whisper something no one wanted to hear. In the back seat of the silver sedan, Eleanor sat quietly, her wrinkled hands clutching the handle of her worn leather purse. Her daughter Maya sat in the front, eyes fixed straight ahead, her face calm but distant. Between them sat silence, thick, heavy, and louder than any words could be. "It's for your own good, Mom," Maya said softly, not turning around. Eleanor nodded, but her throat ached. She didn't understand why her daughter wouldn't meet her eyes. The car turned into a long driveway, where a white sign read, "Rosewood Home for Elderly Women." Eleanor's stomach dropped. The place looked clean, quiet, and sad, like a hospital that forgot how to laugh. When the car stopped, Maya stepped out first. Her husband, Caleb, stayed behind the wheel, scrolling his phone. Eleanor looked at him in the mirror. No expression, no warmth, just impatience. "Come on, Mom," Maya said, trying to smile. "They'll take good care of you here." Eleanor hesitated, clutching her purse tighter. Her heart whispered, "This isn't home." But Maya's tone carried a finality that felt like a locked door. Two nurses came forward, with kind smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "Welcome, Mrs. Brooks," one of them said. The world blurred. Eleanor stepped out slowly, her knees trembling. Her daughter's perfume lingered in the air, sweet and sharp, the smell of goodbye. As they walked inside, the sound of the door clicking shut behind them felt like the ending of something sacred. Eleanor turned back, expecting Maya to follow, but her daughter only stood near the doorway, arms crossed, eyes glistening but firm. "I'll visit next week," Maya whispered. Eleanor smiled weakly, though her lips quivered. She reached out, but Maya took a small step back. It was that tiny step, that single inch of distance, that broke Eleanor's heart. The nurse placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, guiding her down the hallway, lined with old photographs and quiet souls in wheelchairs. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and lilacs, the scent of pretending everything was fine. Caleb honked from outside, and Maya flinched. She turned, walked briskly to the car, and shut the door harder than she meant to. "Did you do it?" Caleb asked without looking up. "Yeah," she said, voice cracking. "She's staying." He nodded, indifferent. As they drove away, Maya looked back through the rear window. Her mother's small figure stood at the door, waving gently, the morning light washing over her silver hair like a halo. The car turned a corner, and she was gone. The silence returned, thicker this time. Maya pressed her hand against her chest, as if trying to hold something from breaking inside. Caleb reached over and turned on the radio, drowning her thoughts in music. Inside Rosewood, Eleanor sat on the edge of her new bed, staring at the window. Outside, leaves swirled in the autumn wind. She whispered softly, "She used to hold my hand, crossing streets. Now she leaves me at 1. She looked at her purse. Inside were 3 photos. Maya as a baby, Maya's wedding, and a recent one with her grandson. She smiled at each picture, then at the empty chair across from her. "Maybe next week," she murmured, echoing her daughter's promise. A nurse came in, gently placing a blanket over her shoulders. "You have a beautiful daughter," she said kindly. Eleanor nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes, she just forgot for a moment." The nurse smiled sadly, and for a moment, The whole room seemed to hold its breath, as if even the walls knew this was not the way love was meant to end. Long before the quiet halls of Rosewood, there was a small apartment filled with the smell of cinnamon bread and Sunday laughter. Eleanor used to hum while stirring her coffee, watching little Maya twirl around the kitchen in her socks, pretending the floor was a stage. "Mama, look," she'd say, arms out, face glowing. Eleanor would clap, pretending her daughter was on Broadway. "One day, you'll dance for the world," she'd whisper. Back then, love was simple. A glance, a hug, a promise made over homemade soup. Their world was small, but beautiful, like a snow globe that didn't know it could break. The refrigerator was old, the wallpaper peeling, but to Eleanor, it was a palace, and at the center of it all was Maya, her reason for breathing. But time moves like water, carving even the strongest stones. As Maya grew, laughter turned to sighs, and late-night talks became shorter. She wanted more: college, travel, a life beyond their tiny world. Eleanor encouraged her, hiding her ache. "Go, baby, go live," she'd say, though the words scraped her throat. When Maya got her first job downtown, she'd come home tired, often silent at dinner. "You okay, sweetheart?" Eleanor would ask. "Just busy, Mom," Maya would reply, scrolling through her phone. The warmth that once lived in their small apartment began to cool, not suddenly, but slowly, like sunlight fading without anyone noticing. Eleanor told herself it was just life, but in her quiet moments, she'd stare at the empty couch and whisper, "I miss my little girl." Years passed, and Maya met Caleb. He was charming at first, polite, ambitious, always talking about goals and plans. Eleanor wanted to like him, but something about his smile felt like glass, shiny, breakable, cold. Still, for her daughter's sake, she welcomed him. On their first dinner together, Caleb praised Eleanor's cooking, then quickly shifted the conversation to modern living and boundaries. Eleanor smiled, unsure how to fit herself into his dictionary. After they married, Maya began visiting less. Calls came shorter, birthdays quieter. When Eleanor fell and hurt her hip one winter, Maya sent flowers, but didn't come. She said Caleb's job moved them across town, and traffic was terrible. Eleanor laughed it off to the nurse, but that night she cried softly into her pillow. Love, she realized, doesn't always leave loudly. Sometimes it just fades quietly, unnoticed. One Sunday afternoon, Maya did visit, wearing expensive perfume and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She brought groceries and new curtains for her mother's apartment. "You need nicer things, Mom," she said. Eleanor nodded, though her hands lingered on the old ones, the ones she and Maya had picked years ago. Over tea, Eleanor asked about her grandson. "He's growing fast," Maya said, glancing at her phone again. "You should visit sometime." "I'd love to," Eleanor whispered, "but you never tell me when." Maya looked guilty for a heartbeat, then changed the subject. When she left, Eleanor stood at the window, waving until the car disappeared. The house felt emptier than usual, the silence sharp and echoing. That night, she sat by the lamp and wrote in her journal, "She's drifting, and I don't know how to call her back." The first real argument came on a rainy Tuesday. Eleanor had called, crying, because her landlord planned to raise the rent. "You could stay with us for a while," Maya said hesitantly, covering the phone's mic as Caleb's muffled voice spoke behind her. "But Caleb thinks maybe you'd be more comfortable somewhere with more help." Eleanor froze. "More help?" she repeated. "You mean not with you?" Maya's silence said everything. The rain hammered against the window as Eleanor whispered, "I changed your diapers, Maya. I carried you on my back through snowstorms. And now you're telling me I'd be better somewhere else?" On the other end, Maya's voice cracked. "Mom, please. It's just temporary." But Eleanor knew better. She hung up quietly and stared at her reflection in the dark window, a woman aging faster than she realized. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled. Inside, a mother's heart began to break, piece by quiet piece. It was a bright Saturday morning when Maya decided to visit again. The kind of morning that made everything look better than it truly was. The sky was sharp blue, the trees swaying gently, and Eleanor had been up since dawn, baking her daughter's favorite banana bread. She laid the table like it was a feast. 2 mugs, a vase of daisies, and a little plate of butter curls she shaped with a spoon. Just like old times. When the knock came, her heart leapt. She opened the door, smiling wide, until she saw Caleb standing behind Maya, arms crossed, his face stiff. "Hi, Mom," Maya said, her voice lighter than her eyes. Caleb followed her in, scanning the small living room like an inspector. "It's cozy," he said flatly, brushing invisible dust off the couch. Eleanor forced a smile. She could already feel something wasn't right. They sat down for coffee, and for a while, it almost felt normal. Maya talked about work, Caleb about his new business plans, while Eleanor nodded, pretending to keep up. But there was tension under every word, like a thread pulled too tight. When Eleanor excused herself to get more milk, she heard their whispers in the kitchen doorway. "You can't keep avoiding it, Maya," Caleb said sharply. "She's getting old. It's too much for us to manage." Maya's voice trembled. "But she's my mother," Caleb sighed. "Exactly. And if you really love her, you'll do what's best for her. She needs proper care, a home that's safe." Eleanor stood frozen, milk jug trembling in her hand. The words, "a home that's safe," sliced through her chest. Her home had always been with her daughter. How could safety mean being sent away? When she returned to the table, her hands were steady, but her eyes told another story. Caleb smiled politely, acting as though nothing had been said. "So, Mrs. Brooks," he began, "have you ever heard of Rosewood? It's one of the best retirement communities in the city." Eleanor's spoon stopped midair. "Retirement community?" she echoed. Maya jumped in, forcing a cheerful tone. "It's not what you think, Mom. It's peaceful. Lots of people your age. Activities. Nurses." Eleanor smiled faintly. "You mean a place for old people?" Maya hesitated, glancing at Caleb, who simply nodded. "You'd have your own room," Maya continued, "and people to help with your medicine, your meals." Eleanor looked down at her hands, the same hands that had held her daughter's feverish body through countless nights. "And who will help with the loneliness?" she asked softly. No one answered. The visit ended early. Maya hugged her mother tightly, whispering, "We'll talk more about it later." Caleb waited by the car, pretending to check his messages. When the door closed behind them, Eleanor sank into her chair, the house suddenly louder in its silence. The banana bread sat untouched, the butter melting into nothing. She stared at the daisies, now drooping in the vase, and whispered, "A home that's safe, but not with you." Her eyes wandered to the photos on the wall. Maya's graduation, her wedding, her baby's first steps. Every milestone marked by love, not convenience. The ache in her chest was sharp, but quiet, like a needle instead of a knife. She didn't cry. Instead, she stood up, cleaned the table, and put away the extra cup. "Just in case," she murmured to herself, though she didn't know what she meant anymore. That night, the phone rang. Maya's voice was shaky. "Mom, can we talk?" Eleanor smiled sadly into the dark. "You already have, sweetheart," she said. "I heard everything." Silence filled the line. Heavy, guilty silence. "I just want what's best for you," Maya whispered. "I know," Eleanor replied, her voice breaking. "You always have." But when she hung up, she sat for a long time by the window, watching the city lights blink in the distance, like faraway stars. She thought of all the times she had prayed for her daughter's happiness, never realizing that one day it would come at the cost of her own. Outside, a siren wailed faintly, and Eleanor closed her eyes. Somewhere deep inside, she felt the first quiet acceptance of a truth she didn't want to name. That love, when tested by life, can sometimes forget itself. The next few weeks passed like a slow leak in a tire. Small at first, then impossible to ignore. Maya called less. When she did, her words were short, polished, careful. "How's the weather there, Mom? Did you take your vitamins? Don't forget to lock your door." Eleanor always smiled through the phone, answering like a soldier, obeying gentle orders. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm fine." But after each call ended, the silence filled the room like fog. She began noticing the things that broke. The squeaky hinge on her bedroom door, the flickering kitchen light, the ache in her back that never quite left. The world felt heavier, slower. One evening, she sat in her armchair, watching the sun bleed into the horizon, whispering to herself, "Maybe she's right. Maybe I do need help." But deep inside, she wasn't thinking about help. She was thinking about love, and how easily it can be mistaken for burden. Maya, on the other hand, was drowning in guilt she didn't know how to name. Caleb had a way of making her choices sound logical. "You're doing her a favor," he'd say over dinner, cutting his steak with mechanical precision. "She'll be around people her age. You can visit every weekend." Win-Win Maya would nod, staring at her plate, telling herself it was true. But every time she passed an elderly woman on the street, she'd feel her throat tighten. She started avoiding certain routes home, the ones that passed by her mother's neighborhood. One night, she dreamed of her childhood, of her mother braiding her hair, humming softly. When she woke, tears wet her pillow. Caleb stirred beside her. "You okay?" he mumbled. "Just tired," she said, rolling away, pressing her face into the dark. She told herself she was being responsible, but responsibility had never felt so cruel. Eleanor's landlord knocked one morning, apologetic but firm. "Rent's going up again, Miss Brooks. New owners. You know how it is," she smiled weakly. "Of course," she said, her voice calm, even as her heart sank. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table with a calculator and old receipts, trying to make numbers behave. But they didn't. They refused to stretch like they used to. Finally, she picked up the phone and dialed Maya. "Sweetheart," she began, "I might need a little help this month." Just until I figure things out, Maya hesitated on the other end. Caleb's voice whispered in the background, "Tell her about Rosewood." Maya swallowed hard. "Mom," she said gently, "remember the place I mentioned? The one with the gardens and nurses? Maybe it's time we really think about it." Eleanor's hand tightened around the receiver. "Think about it," she repeated. "You mean go there?" Maya stayed silent. The quiet between them said everything. That Sunday, Maya came with brochures, glossy pictures of smiling gray-haired women, painting and doing yoga. "See, Mom," she said softly. "They even have art classes. You used to love painting." Eleanor flipped through the pages. Everything looked too clean, too perfect, like a picture frame with no heartbeat. "It's beautiful," she said finally. "But will you visit?" Maya's eyes darted away. Of course, she said quickly. Every week. I promise. Eleanor smiled faintly. She'd heard that tone before. The tone people use when they're trying to convince themselves. Still, she nodded. If it makes you happy, darling. Maya's eyes filled with tears. It's not about me, she said, but even she didn't believe it. Caleb waited by the door, car keys jingling, impatient. As they left, he muttered, "She'll thank us later." Maya didn't answer. She just looked back one last time at the home that smelled like cinnamon in memory, feeling something inside her quietly break. When the day finally came, it was bright, too bright for such a goodbye. Eleanor dressed carefully, wearing her favorite floral dress and her small silver locket, the one holding a tiny picture of baby Maya. She stood by the mirror, whispering to her reflection, "Don't cry. Queens don't cry." When the car pulled up, she smiled bravely, as if going on a trip. Maya helped her into the back seat, their hands touching briefly, warm, trembling. "You'll be okay, Mom," Maya said softly. Eleanor nodded, eyes glistening. "Just remember your promise." The drive was quiet. When they arrived, Eleanor looked at the white sign, Rosewood Home for Elderly Women, and forced herself to breathe. The nurses welcomed her kindly. But when Maya turned to leave, Eleanor felt a sharp ache pierce her chest. She wanted to call out, to beg her daughter to stay. Instead, she whispered, "Take care, my darling." Maya nodded quickly, tears spilling down her face as she walked away. The promise of weekly visits already trembling like a leaf in the wind. The first few days at Rosewood felt like walking through someone else's dream. Quiet, tidy, and too polite to feel real. The hallways smelled faintly of lavender and bleach, and the clocks ticked loudly, as if reminding everyone inside that time had nowhere else to go. Eleanor's room was small but neat. A single bed, a window facing the garden, and an empty chair she imagined her daughter would soon fill. The nurses were kind enough. They called her Miss Brooks, offered warm tea, and smiled with practiced gentleness. Still, the nights were long. She'd lie awake, tracing the patterns on the ceiling, whispering to the darkness, "She'll visit soon." Every morning, she'd sit by the window, watching cars come and go on the street beyond the gate, her heart lifting at every silver sedan that passed, only to sink again when none stopped for her. The other women in Rosewood had stories too. Mrs. Halpern, 2 doors down, had 3 sons who promised to call every Sunday. They didn't. Nora, in the next room, had a daughter who visited once a year with expensive perfume and guilt behind her eyes. "You get used to it," Nora told Eleanor one afternoon as they knitted together in the sunroom. "At first, you wait. Then you stop waiting. Then you start pretending you never waited at all." Eleanor smiled sadly, pretending to agree. But each evening, when the sky turned orange and the air smelled of roses, she found herself glancing at the entrance anyway. She imagined Maya walking through, carrying her grandson, laughing the way she used to. Sometimes she even rehearsed what she'd say. "You look tired, sweetheart. Sit. Let me make you tea." But the chair by the window stayed empty. One Friday morning, the nurse brought her a letter. Eleanor's hands trembled as she unfolded it, her heart thudding like a drum. It wasn't from Maya. It was from the city's housing department. A notice about her old apartment being sold. Demolition planned for new condominiums, it read. She stared at the paper, the words blurring into waves. That little home, her home, where every wall had held laughter and tears, would soon be gone. She whispered, "They're erasing us, one memory at a time." Later that evening, she placed the letter under her pillow, like a relic of a world that had already forgotten her. When the nurse checked in, she smiled brightly, pretending to be fine. But when the door closed, she let out a quiet sob that filled the small room. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping softly against the glass like an echo of her own heartbeat. Meanwhile, Maya was buried in deadlines, grocery lists, and the noise of city life. Weeks slipped by, then months. Each time she thought of visiting, something always came up. A client meeting, her son's soccer game, or Caleb's constant reminders. "Your mom's fine," he'd say. "That place is top-rated. Don't guilt yourself." But at night, when the city lights flickered through their apartment window, she'd picture her mother's hands, the ones that had sewn her dresses, cooked her favorite meals, brushed her hair while singing softly. She'd promise herself, next weekend. "I'll go next weekend." But weekends turned to months, and months to silence. Once, she picked up the phone, dialed Rosewood's number, and froze when the nurse answered. "Oh, she's doing fine," the nurse said cheerfully. "Quiet lady." Always waiting by the window, Maya's throat closed. She hung up without speaking, guilt wrapped around her like a winter scarf. Tight, suffocating, inescapable. Eleanor grew weaker that winter. Her steps slowed, her laughter dimmed, but still, she dressed neatly every morning, combed her silver hair, and placed her purse by the chair, just in case Maya came. "She'll be here," she told Nora, smiling softly. She promised. Nora didn't answer. One night, during dinner, Eleanor looked around at the other women, all of them eating quietly, their faces tired but calm, and whispered to herself, "We all have someone who forgot." That night, she took out the small locket from around her neck and opened it under the lamplight. Inside, baby Maya's face smiled up at her, pure and innocent. "You didn't mean to," she whispered, her tears glistening. "You just got lost in your own life." Then, with trembling fingers, she placed the locket beside the empty chair by the window and whispered to the dark, "In case she comes when I'm sleeping." Winter crept into Rosewood quietly, like an old cat finding its way back to the same doorstep. The gardens froze, the roses curled into themselves, and the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and pine-scented candles. Eleanor had grown thinner, her steps smaller, her voice softer. Some mornings she forgot where she was. She'd wake up and call out, "Maya, breakfast's ready," only to find the empty room staring back. The nurses spoke gently to her, reminding her where she was, but sometimes Eleanor just smiled and nodded, as if playing along in someone else's play. On her nightstand sat her purse, her glasses, and the locket she no longer wore, too heavy for her fragile neck. Still, every day she sat by the window, whispering to the chair beside her, "Maybe today." Outside, the world moved on, but inside, time slowed until it felt like syrup. One evening, a new nurse named Rachel took her hand. "You waiting for someone, Miss Brooks?" she asked kindly. Eleanor smiled faintly. "My daughter. She's busy, but she'll come." Rachel squeezed her hand gently. "You must love her very much." Eleanor nodded. "She's my heart walking around outside my body." That night, Rachel wrote a note in her file. "Patient often speaks lovingly of daughter awaiting visit." It was standard procedure, but something about Eleanor's quiet hope lingered in Rachel's mind. She started checking on her more often, bringing her tea, adjusting her blanket, sitting with her in silence. And sometimes, when Eleanor drifted between waking and dreaming, she'd whisper old lullabies, songs her mother once sang, songs Maya had long forgotten. Her voice cracked on the high notes, But she sang anyway, because love remembers even when the mind starts to fade. Across the city, Maya's world looked nothing like the one she'd left behind. Her office was all glass and noise. Her home spotless, but empty of warmth. Caleb was traveling more, distant even when he was near. Their son was busy with school, their conversations quick and distracted. Yet every time Maya passed her reflection, she'd see traces of her mother. The shape of her mouth, the way her eyes softened when tired. It haunted her. One afternoon, she found the old journal Eleanor used to keep, filled with recipes, pressed flowers, and little notes written in looping handwriting. On one yellowed page, it read, "If she ever forgets I love her, may the wind whisper it back to her heart." Maya traced the words with trembling fingers. That night, she dreamed of her mother sitting alone in a white room, waiting by a window. When she woke, her pillow was wet with tears, and her chest ached with something she didn't want to name. Guilt. Days turned to weeks, and Eleanor's memory slipped like sand through a fist. Some days, she thought she was still young, waiting for her husband to come home. Other days, she remembered Maya clearly. Her laugh, her favorite blue sweater, the sound of her teenage footsteps down the hallway. But then, sometimes, she'd stop mid-sentence, lost in a fog she couldn't escape. The staff grew worried. Rachel called Maya several times, leaving voicemails that went unanswered, until one snowy morning, Maya finally picked up. "Mrs. Brooks's health is declining," Rachel said gently. "She's been asking for you." Maya's breath caught. "Asking for me?" "Yes," Rachel said softly, rounded by silence. Caleb walked in, loosening his tie. "What's wrong?" he asked. "It's Mom," Maya said, eyes glistening. She's getting worse." Caleb sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You knew this would happen. She's old, Maya. Don't make it harder than it is." "Harder?" Maya snapped. "You think it's hard for me. Try being her, sitting alone, waiting for a daughter who never comes." Caleb frowned. "You're being emotional. She's my mother," Maya whispered fiercely. "She gave up everything for me." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Caleb muttered, "If you go, you'll just upset her. Let the nurses handle it." But Maya wasn't listening. She was already on her phone, searching directions to Rosewood, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. The snow outside fell heavier, each flake landing softly, like the unspoken apologies between a mother and a daughter who had both waited too long. The road to Rosewood was slick with melting snow, the kind that turns the world gray and quiet. Maya gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles pale against the leather. Each mile felt heavier than the last. She hadn't been there in almost a year. Her mother's face, once so clear in her mind, had started to blur, replaced by the guilt she tried to drown in work and errands. Now, every traffic light, every turn, felt like a confession. The radio played softly, but she couldn't listen. In her passenger seat sat a bouquet of white lilies, her mother's favorite. She whispered to herself, "Just hold on, Mom, please." As she pulled into the driveway of Rosewood, her stomach twisted. The white sign stood where it always had, clean and cheerful, mocking her with its calmness. She parked, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the biting cold. Inside, the air was warm and too still. The front desk nurse looked up, recognition flickering across her face. "You're Mrs. Brooks's daughter," she said gently. "She's been waiting for you." Maya's throat tightened. "Can I see her?" The nurse hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, but—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Maya's heartbeat quickened as she walked down the long hallway. The walls were lined with framed paintings. scenes of beaches and flowers, bright lies against the smell of antiseptic. Every footstep echoed like a clock ticking too loudly. At the end of the corridor, Rachel stood by a half-open door, her eyes soft and heavy. "She's been asking for you all morning," Rachel whispered. "She's a little tired today, but I think she'll know you." Maya nodded, tears already spilling down her cheeks as she stepped inside. Eleanor was sitting by the window, wrapped in a pale blue shawl, her head tilted slightly, as though listening to something only she could hear. The light from the window made her skin look almost translucent, like paper. Her eyes were open but distant, gazing at the snow outside. "Mom?" Maya whispered. Eleanor blinked, slowly turning her head. For a moment, there was no recognition, just the quiet confusion of someone caught between two worlds. Then, softly, a smile spread across her face. "Maya," she breathed, her voice fragile. "You came." Maya fell to her knees beside her, clutching her hand. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she sobbed. "I should have been here. I should have come sooner." Eleanor's fingers trembled as they brushed her daughter's cheek. "Shh," she whispered. "Don't cry, sweetheart. You're here now." Her voice was faint, but full of warmth. Maya pressed her forehead against her mother's hand, the weight of 1,000 regrets pressing down on her shoulders. They sat together for a long while, saying very little. Maya told her about her son's soccer games, her new job, the flowers blooming downtown. Eleanor listened, nodding slowly, her eyes closing between sentences as if each word were a lullaby. "You sound just like your father," she murmured once, smiling faintly. "Always talking about the little things." Maya laughed through tears. "I missed you so much, Mom." Eleanor's hand tightened weakly around hers. "I missed you too, my love." Every day, a pause hung in the air, soft, final, sacred. Eleanor turned her gaze back to the window. "I saved your seat," she whispered. Maya followed her eyes and saw it, the empty chair beside the window, where a small silver locket rested. Maya reached for it with shaking hands, opening it to see the faded picture of herself as a baby. "You kept this," she said through tears. Eleanor smiled faintly. "I kept everything that was you." The sun began to set, spilling gold across the snow. Eleanor's breathing slowed, her fingers loosening in Maya's grasp. "Mom?" Maya whispered urgently. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open one last time. "Don't be sad, darling," she said softly. "You gave me the world once. That's enough for any mother." Maya shook her head, tears falling freely now. "No, Mom, please stay with me." But Eleanor only smiled, her gaze distant and peaceful. "When the wind blows through the trees," she whispered, "that's me saying I love you." Then, with one gentle breath, she was gone. The room fell still. Outside, the snow stopped falling, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Maya sat there for a long time, her mother's hand still in hers, the locket pressed to her heart. The nurse quietly closed the door, leaving them in the soft glow of evening, a mother and daughter, together again, at last, in the silence of love remembered too late. The morning of the funeral was cold, but not the kind of cold that bites, the kind that numbs. The sky was gray, low, and heavy, as if the heavens themselves were tired. The church was small, the kind with wooden pews that creaked when people breathed. A few residents from Rosewood came, along with 2 nurses and the old pastor who had known Eleanor only through her prayers. Maya sat in the front row, hands clasped tightly in her lap, the locket her mother had left her hanging from her neck. Her husband, Caleb, stood beside her, silent and uncomfortable in his dark suit. The air smelled of lilies and old wood polish. When the choir began to sing softly, "Amazing Grace," Maya's chest ached so deeply she thought she might shatter. She stared at the small white casket and whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom," under her breath. The words disappeared into the stillness. When the pastor spoke, his voice was calm and tender. "Eleanor Brooks lived a humble life," he said. "She loved deeply and forgave easily. She believed love was a promise, not always kept, but never forgotten." Maya's tears came harder then. Every sentence felt like a mirror, reflecting the woman she'd lost and the daughter she'd failed to be. The pastor gestured for family to speak. Maya stood slowly, her legs trembling. She walked to the podium, holding a folded piece of paper, but when she looked out at the faces, the words slipped away. "My mother," she began, her voice breaking. "She taught me everything: how to cook, how to pray, how to love, without expecting anything back. And her throat closed. "And I forgot how to do that." The crowd was silent. Even Caleb looked down. Maya placed the paper on the casket and whispered, "I love you, Mom. I always did." Then she sat down, trembling, as the choir's last note faded into quiet. After the service, people offered soft condolences, hands on shoulders, murmured blessings, polite sympathy. But none of it reached her. The sound of shuffling feet, the closing of hymnals, the smell of flowers, it all blurred into one aching fog. When everyone had gone, Maya stayed behind. The church was empty except for her and the casket. She knelt beside it, tracing her mother's name engraved on the small plaque. Eleanor M. Brooks, beloved mother and friend. The words felt too small for a woman so vast in heart. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded note she'd written that morning. Inside, it read, "If you can hear me, forgive me. I remember now." She slipped it between the flowers on the casket, her tears falling on the paper. "I'll visit you," she whispered. "Every week. I promise this time." But even as she said it, she knew promises made to the dead were really just apologies spoken too late. Outside, the wind blew softly across the cemetery. The trees swayed gently, their bare branches whispering in the cold air. Maya watched as two men lowered the casket into the ground, each motion slow, careful, reverent. When the first handful of soil hit the lid, the sound was small but final, like the closing of a door that would never open again. She knelt there long after everyone left, her knees damp from the earth, her breath fogging in the air. Somewhere, far off, church bells rang noon. She looked up at the sky, gray and endless, and imagined her mother's voice riding the wind. "When the wind blows through the trees, that's me saying I love you." The branches moved gently above her, and for a moment, it almost felt true. Maya closed her eyes and let the cold settle into her bones, as if it were punishment, or maybe penance. That night, the apartment felt wrong. Too quiet, too clean. The walls echoed with things unsaid. Caleb tried to speak once, but she turned away. Later, when everyone slept, Maya walked into her mother's old room, the one she'd once promised to visit, the one that now smelled faintly of dust and lavender. She sat on the bed, holding the locket tightly in her palm, whispering, "I should have been there more." The moonlight spilled through the curtains, glinting off the silver surface. She opened it again, staring at the tiny picture of baby Maya smiling back. "You loved me even when I forgot you," she said softly. "You loved me anyway." Then she lay down, clutching the locket to her chest, and cried, not loud, not desperate, but quietly, like a confession whispered into the dark. Outside, The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying with it a sound that could almost have been a mother's sigh. A week after the funeral, Maya returned to Rosewood. The air was warmer now, the first signs of spring peeking through the gray. She parked in the same spot she had that final day. But everything felt different. The building that once seemed cold now looked almost peaceful, as if holding her mother's spirit within its walls. The receptionist recognized her and offered a soft, sympathetic smile. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said gently. "Your mother was a special woman." Maya nodded. Her voice caught somewhere between grief and gratitude. I came to pick up her things." The nurse led her down the familiar hallway. The same creaking floorboards, the same smell of lavender and antiseptic. When they reached the small room, it was just as her mother had left it. Bed neatly made, the blue shawl folded on the chair, the window open a crack. For a moment, Maya could almost imagine her sitting there still, smiling, waiting. The nurse handed her a small box. "These were in her drawer," she said softly. "She asked us to keep them safe for you." Maya took it carefully, her hands trembling. When the nurse left, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the box. It was made of old wood, carved with tiny flowers along the lid. She lifted it open and froze. Inside were stacks of envelopes, each one labeled in her mother's familiar handwriting. "To my daughter, Maya." Some were yellowed with age. Others looked newly written. Maya picked one at random, her breath catching as she opened it. The letter was dated from months ago. "My dearest Maya," it began. "I know life gets busy. Don't be ashamed for living it. That's what I wanted for you. To live, to laugh, to raise your boy and love your husband. If you can't come see me, just promise you'll be happy. That's enough for me." Maya pressed the paper to her lips, sobbing silently. Every word felt like forgiveness she didn't deserve. She read for hours. Each letter was a heartbeat, small moments of love frozen in ink. "Today, I baked apple pie and saved a slice for you. The roses outside the window are blooming. They remind me of your first recital dress. I heard your son's name from the nurse. Tell him Grandma is proud of him. I still keep your baby shoes on my nightstand. They make me smile." The letters were full of life, memories, prayers, even little jokes. Some ended with short lines like, "Be kind to yourself," or "Don't forget to dance when it rains." As the afternoon sun shifted through the curtains, Maya realized something. Her mother had never stopped being part of her life, even when she was absent. She had written her love across days, across silence, across years of waiting. And suddenly, the guilt that had weighed on her chest began to shift, not disappearing, but transforming into something gentler, a grief wrapped in grace. At the very bottom of the box was one final envelope, different from the rest. It was sealed with a piece of silver thread and had no date. In the corner, her mother had written, "For when you're ready to forgive yourself." Maya's hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph. The photo showed them together years ago, sitting on the old porch swing, laughing so hard that Eleanor's eyes were almost closed. On the back, written in her mother's careful script, were 5 words. "You were always enough, darling." The letter itself was short. "My sweet girl, if you are reading this, it means my time has ended. I want you to remember that I never needed you to be perfect, only present in your own life. I forgave you long before you asked. Love doesn't vanish, it just changes shape. So live, Maya. Live the way I couldn't anymore." Maya's tears fell onto the page, blurring the ink into small rivers. When she finally stepped outside, the sun had dipped low behind the trees. She stood by the same window where her mother had once sat, clutching the last letter against her heart. The garden below was full of new buds, pink, white, and gold, breaking through the soil as if the earth itself were remembering her mother's touch. The wind brushed softly against her cheek, carrying with it the faint scent of roses. For the first time in a long while, she closed her eyes and smiled. "I forgive me too, Mom," she whispered. "I'll live, I promise." As she walked away, the wind picked up gently, rustling the leaves, and for a fleeting moment, it sounded like laughter, light and familiar, like a mother calling her child home for supper. And, though the world moved on, Maya carried those letters like a heartbeat, each one whispering the same truth. That love, even when forgotten, never truly leaves. It just waits to be found again. Spring settled over the city like a quiet forgiveness. The trees bloomed pale pink, and the air smelled of rain and fresh beginnings. It had been 3 months since Eleanor's funeral, yet her presence lingered everywhere Maya went, in the way sunlight touched the curtains, in the smell of apples, in the sound of the wind brushing against the window pane at night. Every week, she returned to Rosewood, not out of guilt anymore, but love. She brought flowers for the residents, sometimes stayed to read aloud to those who had no visitors. The nurses greeted her with smiles now, calling her our honorary volunteer. One afternoon, she walked past her mother's old room. It was empty, newly painted, ready for another life to move in. Maya stepped inside, touched the window frame, and whispered, "Thank you, Mom, for teaching me that love doesn't die. It waits." Outside, a soft breeze lifted the curtains. For a moment, she could almost hear her mother hum. At home, Maya began a project. She cleared out a corner of her apartment and filled it with photographs, old recipes, and a small journal she called The Wind Remembers. Inside, she wrote her mother's sayings, stories, and even the little lessons she used to ignore. Always make soup when someone's heart is broken. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering without pain. Don't wait for people to be perfect before loving them. Every page felt like stitching her heart back together. Caleb noticed the change in her, the way her laughter had softened, her voice slower, kinder. "One evening," he said, "you've become your mother, you know." Maya smiled. "That's the best thing anyone's ever said to me." She looked toward the window, where the wind moved the curtains gently, and whispered, "You hear that, Mom?" He noticed a few weeks later, Maya returned to her mother's old neighborhood. The apartment building was gone now, replaced by shiny condos and wide glass windows that caught the sunlight. But where her mother's garden once stood, a small patch of land had been left untouched. Wildflowers had grown there on their own, stubborn, bright, alive. Maya knelt down, her fingers brushing the petals, and felt tears rise unbidden. She whispered, "You grew something that never stopped." From her bag, she took out the wooden box of letters. She removed one, the first one her mother had ever written, and buried it gently in the soil. "So, you'll always have a place to rest," she said softly. The wind picked up again, swirling through the flowers, lifting a single petal into the air. It floated upward, carried away on the breeze, and for a moment, Maya thought she heard her mother's voice. "When the wind blows through the trees, that's me saying I love you." Life didn't become perfect. It never does. There were still hard days, still silence in the evenings when the world felt too heavy. But now, whenever loneliness crept in, Maya opened one of her mother's letters and read it aloud. Sometimes she read them to her son, telling him about the woman who had loved them both more than time itself. One evening, her son asked, "Grandma's in the sky now, right?" Maya smiled and nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, but she visits every time the wind blows." He grinned and ran to the window, holding out his small hand. "Then she's here," he said, laughing as the breeze ruffled his hair. Maya watched him, her chest tightening, not with sorrow this time, but peace. Her mother's love had found its way forward, through her, through him, through every breath that still remembered. Years later, when Maya was older and her hair had turned silver, she sat by her own window, her grandson at her feet, listening to her tell this story. The story of a daughter who forgot and a mother who forgave anyway. She spoke slowly, her voice like a lullaby. "You see, sweetheart," she said, "sometimes we lose people not because we stop loving them, but because we forget how to show it. But love is patient. It waits in the quiet until we find our way back." The boy nodded solemnly, holding her hand. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, gentle and familiar. Maya smiled, tilting her face toward it. "She's still with us," she whispered. "Always." The boy looked out the window, eyes wide. "I think I can hear her," he said softly, and somewhere in the shifting air, faint but certain, came the echo of a woman's laughter, warm, eternal, and free.